Hi, good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of Story Reading. I'm reading a story titled The Crooked Tree from this collected short stories by Ruskin Bond. Tonight's story, The Crooked Tree, starts like this. There's a line at the beginning which says, "You must pass your exams and go to college. But do not feel that if you fail, you will be able to do nothing." So passing exam is incidental if you don't think you can do nothing. You can do everything with or without the exam. So the story starts. My room in Shahganj was very small. I had paced about in it so often that I knew its exact measurements, 12 feet by 10. The string of my cot needed tightening. The dip in the middle was so pronounced that I invariably woke up in the morning with a backache. But I was hopeless at tightening charpoy strings. Under the cot was my tin trunk. Its contents ranged from old, rejected manuscripts to clothes and letters and photographs. I had resolved that one day, when I had made some money with a book, I would throw the trunk and everything else out of the window and leave Shahganj forever. But until then, I was a prisoner. The rent was nominal. The window had a view of the bus stop and rickshaw stand, and I had nowhere else to go. I did not live entirely alone. Sometimes a beggar spent the night on the balcony. And during cold or wet weather, the boys from the tea shop, who normally slept on the pavement, crowded into the room. Usually, I woke early in the mornings, as sleep was fitful, uneasy, crowded with dreams. I knew it was 5 o'clock when I heard the first upcountry bus leaving its shed. I would then get up and take a walk in the fields beyond the railroad tracks. So the setting of this story is somewhere in the countryside, near the fields, in a remote village or countryside. One morning, while I was walking in the fields, I noticed someone lying across the pathway, his head and shoulders hidden by the stalks of young sugarcane. When I came near, I saw he was a boy of about 16. His body was twitching convulsively. His face was very quiet, except where a little blood had trickled down his chin. His legs kept moving and his hands fluttered restlessly, helplessly. "What's the matter with you?" I asked, kneeling down beside him. But he was still unconscious and could not answer me. I ran down the footpath to a well and, dipping the end of my shirt in a shallow trough of water, ran back and sponged the boy's face. The twitching ceased, and though he still breathed heavily, his hands became still and his face calm. He opened his eyes and stared at me without any immediate comprehension. "You have bitten your tongue," I said, wiping the blood from his mouth. "Don't worry, I'll stay with you until you feel better." He sat up now and said, "I'm all right, thank you." "What happened?" I asked, sitting down beside him. "Oh, nothing much. It often happens. I don't know why, but I cannot control it." "Have you seen a doctor?" "I went to the hospital. In the beginning, they gave me some pills which I had to take every day. But the pills made me so tired and sleepy that I couldn't work properly. So I stopped taking them. Now this happens once or twice a month. But what does it matter? I am all right when it's over. and I don't feel anything while it is happening. He got to his feet, dusting his clothes and smiling at me. He was slim, long-limbed and bony. There was a little fluff on his cheeks and the promise of a mustache. Where do you live? I asked. I'll walk back with you. I don't live anywhere, he said. Sometimes I sleep in the temple and sometimes in the Gurdwara. In summer months, I sleep in the municipal gardens. Well then, let me come with you as far as the gardens. He told me that his name was Kamal and that he studied at the Shahganj High School and that he hoped to pass his examinations in a few months' time. He was studying hard and if he passed with a good division, he hoped to attend a college. If he failed, there was only the prospect of continuing to live in the municipal gardens. He carried with him a small tray of merchandise supported by straps that went round his shoulders. In it were combs and buttons and cheap toys and little vials of perfume. All day he walked about Shahganj, selling odds and ends to people in the bazaar or at their homes. He made on an average 2 rupees a day, which was enough for his food and his school fees. He told me all this while we walked back to the bus stand. I returned to my room to try and write something, while Kamal went on to the bazaar to try and sell something. There was nothing very unusual about Kamal's being an orphan and a refugee. During the communal Holocaust of 1947, thousands of homes had been broken up and women and children had been killed. What was unusual in Kamal was his sensitivity, a quality I thought rare in a Punjabi youth who had grown up in the frontier provinces during a period of hate and violence. And it was not so much his positive attitude to life that appealed to me. Most people in Shahganj were completely resigned to it, to their lot. As his gentleness, his quiet voice, and the smile that flickered across his face, regardless of whether he was sad or happy. Sad or happy. In the morning, when I opened my door, I found Kamal asleep at the top of the steps, his tray a few feet away. I shook him gently as he woke at once. I shook him gently and he woke at once. Have you been sleeping here all night? I asked. Why didn't you come inside? Oh, it was very late, he said, and I didn't want to disturb you. Someone could have stolen your things while you slept. Oh, I sleep quite lightly. Besides, I have nothing of special value. But I came to ask you something. Do you need any money? I asked. No, I want you to take your meal with me tonight. But where? I asked. You don't have a place of your own. It will be too expensive in a restaurant. In your room, he said. Sorry, I missed it. In your room, he said. I'll bring the food and cook it here. You have a stove? I think so, I said. I'll have to look for it. I'll come at 7, said Kamal, strapping on his tray. Don't worry, I know how to cook. He ran down the steps and made for the bazaar. I began to look for the oil stove, found it at the bottom of my tin trunk, and then discovered I hadn't any pots or pans or dishes. Finally, I borrowed these from Deepchand, the barber. Kamal brought a chicken for our dinner. This was a costly luxury in Shahganj, to be taken only 2 or 3 times a year. He had bought the bird for 3 rupees. which was cheap considering it was not too skinny. While Kamal set about roasting it, I went down to the bazaar and procured a bottle of beer on credit, and thus this served as an appetizer. That's interesting. We are having an expensive meal, I observed. 3 rupees for the chicken and 3 rupees for the beer. But I wish we could do it more often. But I wish we could do it more often. We should do it at least once a month, said Kamal. It should be possible if we work hard. You know how to work. You work from morning till night. But you are a writer, Rusty. This is different. You have to wait for a mood. Oh, I am not a genius that I can afford the luxury of moods. No, I am just lazy, that's all. Perhaps you are writing the wrong things. I know I am, but I don't know how I can write anything else. Have you tried? Yes, but there is no money in it. I wish I could make a living in some other way. Even if I repaired cycles, I would make more money. Then why don't you repair cycles? No, I will not repair cycles. I would rather be a bad writer than a good repairer of cycles. But let us not think of work. There is time enough for work. I want to know more about you. Kamal did not know if his parents were alive or dead. He had lost them, literally, when he was 6. It happened at the Amritsar railroad station, where trains coming across the border disgorged thousands of refugees, or pulled into the station half empty, drenched with blood and littered with corpses. Kamal and his parents were lucky to escape the massacre. Had they travelled on an earlier train, they had tried desperately to go into one, they might well have been killed. But circumstances favored them then, only to trick them later. Kamal was clinging. I think there's a phone. Kamal was clinging to his mother's sari while she remained close to her husband, who was elbowing his way through the frightened, bewildered throng of refugees. Glancing over his shoulder at a woman who lay on the ground, wailing and beating her breasts, Kamal collided with a burly Sikh and lost his grip on his mother's sari. The Sikh had a long curved sword at his waist, and Kamal stared up at him in awe and fascination, at his long hair, which had fallen loose, and his wild black beard, and the bloodstains on his white shirt. The Sikh pushed him out of the way, and when Kamal looked around for his mother, she was not to be seen. She was hidden from him by a mass of restless bodies, pushed in different directions. He could hear her calling, "Kamal, where are you? Kamal." He tried to force his way through the crowd in the direction of the voice, but he was carried the other way. At night, when the platform was empty, he was still searching for his mother. Eventually, some soldiers took him away. They looked for his parents, but without success, and finally, they sent Kamal to a refugee camp. From there, he went to an orphanage. But when he was 8 and felt himself a man, he ran away from the orphanage. He worked for some time as a helper in a tea shop, but when he started getting epileptic fits, the shopkeeper asked him to leave. and he found himself on the streets, begging for a living. He begged for a year, moving from one town to another, and ended up finally at Shahganj. By then he was 12 and too old to beg, but he had saved some money, and with it he bought a small stock of combs, buttons, cheap perfumes, and bangles, and converting himself into a mobile shop, went from door to door selling his wares. Shahganj was a small town, and there was no house which Kamal hadn't visited. Everyone recognized him, and there were some who offered him food and drink. The children knew him well because he played on a small flute whenever he made his rounds, and they followed him to listen to the flute. I began to look forward to Kamal's presence. He dispelled some of my own loneliness. I found I could work better, knowing that I did not have to work alone. And Kamal came to me, perhaps because I was the first person to have taken a personal interest in his life, and because I saw nothing frightening in his sickness. Most people in Shahganj thought epilepsy was infectious. Some considered it a form of divine punishment for sins committed in a former life. Except for children, those who knew of his condition generally gave him a wide berth. At 16, a boy grows like the young wheat, springing up so fast that he is unaware of what is taking place within him. His, his mind quickens, his gestures become more confident, hair sprouts like young grass on his face and chest, and his muscles begin to mature. Never again will he experience so much change and growth in so short a time. He is full of currents and countercurrents. Kamal combined the bloom of youth with the beauty of the short-lived. It made me sad even to look at his pale, slim body. It hurt me to look into his eyes. Life and death were always struggling in their depths. Good prose. Should I go to Delhi and take up a job? I asked. Why not? You're always talking about it, he said. Why don't you come too? Perhaps they can stop your fits. We'll need money for that. When I have passed my examinations, I will come. Then I'll wait, I said. I was 22 and there was a world enough and time enough for everything. We decided to save a little money from his small earnings and my occasional payments. We would need money to go to Delhi, money to live there until we could earn a living. We put away 20 rupees one week, but lost it the next week when we lent it to a friend who owned a cycle rickshaw. But this gave us the occasional use of his cycle, and early one morning, with Kamal sitting on the crossbar, I rode out of Shahganj. After cycling for about 2 miles, we got down and pushed the cycle off the road, taking a path through a paddy field, and then through a field of young maize, until in the distance we saw a tree, a crooked tree, growing beside an old well. I do not know the name of that tree. I had never seen one like it before. It had a crooked trunk and crooked branches and was clothed in thick, broad, crooked leaves, like the leaves on which food is served in a bazaar. In the trunk of the tree there was a hole, and when we set the bicycle down with a crash, a pair of green parrots flew out and went dipping and swerving across the fields. There was grass around the well, crop shot by grazing cattle. We sat in the shade of the crooked tree, and Kamal untied the red cloth in which he had brought our food. When we had eaten, we stretched ourselves out on the grass. I closed my eyes and became aware of a score of different sensations. I heard a cricket singing in the tree, the cooing of pigeons from the walls of the old well, the quiet breathing of Kamal, the parrots returning to the tree, the distant hum of an airplane. I smelled the grass and the old bricks round the well and the promise of rain. I felt Kamal's fingers against my arm and the sun creeping over my cheek. And when I opened my eyes, there were clouds on the horizon, and Kamal was asleep, his arm thrown across his face to keep out this glare. I went to the well and, putting my shoulders to the ancient handle, turned the wheel, moving around while cool, clean water gushed out over the stones and along the channel to the fields. The discovery that I could water a field and that I had the power to make things grow gave me a thrill of satisfaction. It was like writing a story that had the ring of truth. I drank from one of the trays. The water was sweet with age. Kamal was sitting up looking at the sky. "It's going to rain," he said. We began cycling homeward, but we were still some way out of Shahganj when it began to rain. A lashing wind swept the rain across our faces, but we exulted in it and sang at the top of our voices until we reached the Shahganj bus stop. Across the railroad tracks and dry riverbed, fields of maize stretched away until there came a dry region of thorn bushes and lantana scrub, where the earth was cut into jagged cracks like a jigsaw puzzle. Dotting the landscape were old abandoned brick kilns. When it rained heavily, the hollows filled up with water. Kamal and I came to one of the hollows to bathe and swim. There was an island in the middle of it, and on this small island, on this small mound, lay the ruins of a hut where a night watchman had once lived, looking after the brick kilns. We would swim out to the island, which was only a few yards from the banks of the hollow. There was a grassy patch in front of the hut, and early in the mornings, before it got too hot, we would wrestle on the grass. Though I was heavier than Kamal, my chest as sound as a new drum, he had a strong, wiry arms and legs, and would often pinion me around the waist with his bony knees. Now, while we wrestled on the new monsoon grass, I felt his body go tense. He stiffened, his legs jugged against my body, and a shudder passed through him. I knew that he had a fit coming on, but I was unable to extricate myself from his arms. He gripped me more tightly as the fit took possession of him. Instead of struggling, I lay still, tried to absorb some of his anguish, tried to draw some of his agitation to myself. I had a strange fancy that by identifying myself with his convulsions, I might alleviate them. I pressed against Kamal and whispered soothingly into his ear. And then, when I noticed his mouth working, I thrust my fingers between his teeth to prevent them from biting his tongue. But so violent was the convulsion that his teeth bit into the flesh of my palm and ground against my knuckles. I shouted with the pain and tried to jerk my hand away, but it was impossible to loosen the grip of his tight jaws. So I closed my eyes and counted till 7 until consciousness returned to him and his muscles relaxed. My hand was shaking and covered with blood. I bound it in my handkerchief and kept it hidden from Kamal. We walked back to the room without talking much. Kamal looked depressed and weak. I kept my hand beneath my shirt, and Kamal was too dejected to notice anything. It was only at night when he returned from his classes that he noticed the cuts, and I told him I had slipped in the road, cutting my hand on some broken glass. Rain upon Shahganj, and until the rain stops, Shahganj is fresh and clean and alive. The children run out of the houses, glorying in their nakedness. The gutters choke, and the narrow street becomes a torrent of water, coursing merrily down to the bus stop. It swirls over the trees and the roofs of the town, and the parched earth soaks it up, exuding a fragrance that comes only once in a year, the fragrance of quenched earth, the most exhilarating of smells. The rain swept in through the door and soaked the cot. When I had succeeded in closing the door, I found the roof leaking, the water trickling down the walls and forming new pictures on the cracking plaster. The door flew open again, and there was Kamal standing on the threshold, shaking himself like a wet dog. Coming in, he stripped and dried himself, then sat shivering on the bed while I made frantic efforts to close the door again. "You need some tea," I said. He nodded, forgetting to smile for once, and I knew his mind was elsewhere, in one of 100 possible places from the dreams. "One day I will write a book," I said, and we drank strong tea in the fast fading twilight. "A real book about real people. Perhaps it will be about you and me and Shahganj, and then we will run away from Shahganj, fly on the wings of Garuda, and all our troubles will be over and fresh troubles will begin. Why should we mind difficulties so long as they are new difficulties?" That's the new philosophy. "First, I must pass my exams," said Kamal. "Otherwise, I can do nothing, go nowhere." "Don't take exams so seriously," I said. "I know that in India they are the passport to any kind of job, and that you cannot become a clerk unless you have a degree. But do not forget that you are studying for the sake of acquiring knowledge and not for the sake of becoming a clerk. You don't want to become a clerk or a bus conductor, do you? You must pass your exams and go to college. But do not feel that if you fail, you will be able to do nothing. Why? You can start making your own buttons instead of selling other people's. You are right, said Kamal. But why not be an educated button manufacturer? Why not, indeed? That's just what I mean. And while you are studying for your exams, I'll be writing my book. I'll start tonight. It's an auspicious night, the beginning of the monsoon. The light did not come on. A tree must have fallen across the wires. I lit a candle and placed it on the windowsill, and while the candle spluttered in the steamy air, Kamal opened his books, and with one hand on a book and the other hand playing with his toes, this attitude helped him to concentrate. He devoted his attention to algebra. I took an ink bottle down from the shelf and, finding it empty, added a little rainwater to the crusted contents. Then I sat down beside Kamal and began to write. But the pen was useless and made blotches all over the paper. And I had no idea what I should write about, though I was full of writing just then. So I began to look at Kamal instead, at his eyes hidden in shadow, and hands, and his hands quiet in the candlelight, and I followed his breathing and the slight movement of his lips as he read softly to himself. And instead of starting my book, I sat and watched Kamal. Sometimes Kamal played the flute at night while I was lying awake, and even when I was asleep, the flute would play in my dreams. Sometimes he brought it to the crooked tree and played it for the benefit of the birds, but the parrots only made harsh noises and flew away. Once, when Kamal was playing his flute to a group of children, he had a fit. The flute fell from his hands, and he began to roll about in the dust on the roadside. The children were frightened and ran away. But the next time they heard Kamal play his flute, they came to listen as usual. That Kamal was gaining in strength, I knew from the way he was able to pin me down whenever we wrestled on the grass near the old brick kilns. It was no longer necessary for me to yield deliberately to him, and though his fits still recurred from time to time, as we knew they would continue to do, he was not so depressed afterwards. The anxiety and the death had gone from his eyes. Oh, his examinations were nearing, and he was working hard. It had yet to begin the first chapter of my. I had yet to begin the first chapter of my book. Because of the necessity of selling 2 or 3 rupees worth of articles every day, he did not get much time for studying, but he stuck to his books until past midnight, and it was seldom that I heard his flute. He put aside his tray of odds and ends during the examinations and walked to the examination center instead. And after 2 weeks, when it was all over, he took up his tray and began his rounds again. In a burst of creativity, I wrote 3 pages of my novel. On the morning the results of the examinations were due, I rose early before Kamal and went down to